Welcome back to Hoopsville, everybody. Sorry about that. Once again, technical difficulties. We'll continue to work on those in the break that we have upcoming, and we will hopefully be transitioning to new software. In the meantime, it may delay us from doing a Thursday show as we planned when we start back in the season. We'll probably get back and running on January 6th. I know that's a long break, but that's kind of why we also did the show here on the 20th. We're just going to have to transition into some new software. No matter what the Band-Aids we put on things, it just doesn't like us. In the meantime, we're back up and running both on Facebook, YouTube, and what. We'll get that all fixed in the meantime if you're missing us. But we hope you at least are enjoying the show. Or if you're watching on demand, enjoying this part. Gordon Mann joined me yesterday to talk about the first 6 weeks of the Division III season in women's basketball. It's a two-part interview. We'll take a break in between. But the first part, Gordon discusses what he's seen so far. And as always, I appreciated the time he took to join us to chat about it. Here's Gordon in a pre-recorded interview. So joining us on the Hoopsville Hotline, it is our friend, Gordon Mann. Sir, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Dave.
I appreciate it as always. Should tell everybody it is pre-taped due to the fact that Gordon is a busy man. Okay, folks? Leave him alone. So first and foremost, first 6 weeks of this season, I don't want to say that I've ever overlooked women's basketball because that's not true. But there has certainly been times where you can look past it because there's not much going on or the results are kind of known. That hasn't necessarily been the case this first 6 weeks. There's been kind of some excitement out there.
Yeah, that's true. The women's Division III basketball season gets off to kind of a slow start, depending on what region you're in. Mm-hmm. So the teams in the West and in the South and in the Central and in the Great Lakes, so those parts of the country where there's not a high concentration of teams, this is their chance to get crossover games. You know, they're in conferences that are fairly large. Some of these teams have already or will soon play their last non-conference game. So you do get some interesting results out of them. But the teams in the Northeast, the kind of the northeastern quadrant of the country, they tend to stay pretty local during the first 6 weeks or so. Some of them, the NESCAC teams, can't get a start right away, and they're always among the better teams in the country. And so it is usually a slow start for that time of year, and then you get more interesting results, generally starting with the holiday tournaments.
Sure.
Over the ones that have just started this week, and then through New Year's, and then you roll into conference play. But this year, two things in particular have made the early part of the season unusual. The first is, for the first time in a long time, the team that was ranked number one in the preseason, Amherst, lost a game. First time they've lost a game in 3 years, but first time a team that was ranked preseason number one lost one this early. Generally speaking, last year, Tufts was number one. They lost their first game on December 20-something to Albright. The year before that, I think it was Tufts again, and I think they lost their first game in conference play to Amherst. So generally, you don't have your number one team lose, which means the votes that are concentrated in that team sort of stay there for kind of weeks on end. And with Amherst losing, and Amherst having 21 of the 25 votes in the preseason, that kind of forced the voters and the national perspective to look at what other teams may be the best team in the country. And so Bowdoin moves into the slot. Hope got some votes. St. Thomas got some votes. Chicago got some votes. Thomas More got some votes. But it doesn't feel like Amherst is this unbeatable juggernaut, and they may very well win the national championship. That may be what happens, but through the first 6 weeks, it doesn't seem like, destiny or fait accompli that's going to happen. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing that happened is Thomas More, because of its unique status, basically is an independent. They're members of the ACAA, but that's a conference that only has a handful of conference tournament games at the end of the season, primarily based in upstate New York and New England. So Thomas More, as much as they're going to travel, is not going to play games up there. So Thomas More has basically been forced to play the majority of their season in the first 8 weeks of the year, because once you get into conference play, there's not going to be any Division III opponents around them in the Cincinnati, within any kind of reasonable driving distance of Cincinnati, who have time on their schedule to play them. Mm-hmm. So they have taken a very, very aggressive tact here. They've played a bunch of top 25 teams. Every weekend they seem to play another. They had something like 6 games in 5 states in 7 days, or something.
Oh, yeah.
Something that would make an NBA team blush. They played Chicago. They played Whitewater, which was ranked. They played Whitman, who's received votes. They played Hope. They played Baldwin-Wallace. They're likely to play DePaul because they're at that event. They're likely to play Mary Hardin Baylor and East Texas Baptist. But because they're concentrating all their games, and more importantly, because they're winning them all convincingly by like double-digit margins, they've created a lot of exciting and interesting results in the first 6 weeks. It seems like every 5th or 6th day, Thomas More is playing another ranked team in their gym and beating them convincingly. So that's given us a lot more interesting games to watch in the first few weeks than we normally would have.
The other thing, well, continuing the Thomas More theme, is you hit on the fact that, one, they're on the road and they're winning convincingly. But what was the note you sent me last week? Something about the top 25 suffered 2 losses. Both were because of the hands of Thomas More. We're used to not a lot of losses, but the fact that they were both a top 5 team that decided to dispatch the other ones was startling.
Yeah. They Thomas More has played. To Jeff Hand's credit, there has played a really difficult schedule. I know you talked with Madison Temple about that, and Ryan Scott covered that around the nation. And for folks who've been visiting the website, we may seem a little bit like d3thomasmore.com for the first 6 weeks here. I looked at the front page, and I think Madison Temple was had her photo on 3 of the 7 top stories.
Yeah,
we're not unaware of that. The quote unquote good news, at least for the rest of Division III, not for Thomas More, is they play 3 games. They play 3 games against Division III opponents in like the last 10 weeks of the season. Yeah. So unless they lose to Geneva or Westminster of Pennsylvania, you're not going to hear anything about them almost until the NCAA tournament. Yeah, and the challenge for them is they're not going to play anyone. Yeah. And no offense to whichever teams end up being the top 3 teams in the ACAA, they're not going to play anyone who gets them ready for the NCAA tournament. Probably their last game against a quality opponent will probably be those last 2 in Texas. And then that will be it.
They're playing down in Texas against Texas Dallas and East Texas Baptist, the first full weekend of November or something like that, and then they play essentially 5 games. That's counting assuming 2 games in the conference tournament, 5 games between then and the end of February. It's a little. I mean, and yes, it's unique. They've got to be in that situation. But Gordon, let's just say taking a what if, and they nearly did it this week. What if they take over the number 1 slot in the top 25? Do you think they can, without playing basically any games, hold on to that number 1 slot, or is it going to be hard to do that when everybody else is playing?
I think that's probably the easiest way to do it, is to get to the top of the ranks and then to stop
and just
playing.
Park yourself.
because as you mentioned, they're going to play. So they're going to play Wesleyan and Franklin, which will both be comfortable wins. Then they'll have DePaul at the end of December. A bunch of schools that are non-Division III, Pikeville, V2, I think, Lindsey Wilson's and AIA. Then the 2 Texas games, and then nothing after the 7th. Yeah. So by the time we do our next poll, which will be January 7th, the Mary Hardin Baylor game won't actually count for that. They'll only have 3 other games left. That's it. And so, there's generally, whatever there is, 13 or 14 weeks in the top 25. They'll have 8 or 9 of them without any games of note. So, meanwhile, the teams that you would expect to be the others that will be their closest competitors, Bowdoin's going to play Amherst and Tufts, and if you believe Middlebury or Trinity's real, they're going to play them. Hope's going to play their arch rivals. They're going to play Trine twice. Chicago's going to play through the UAA schedule. All of those teams are going to play, and unless Bowdoin runs the table, at which point I think you would have to say, all right, you tip your cap to them. I don't know who else would have a chance to catch them. It's pretty rare that you see a top team not lose and lose votes, and that's what happened this week. I think appropriately so, when Thomas More just demolished Hope, who was ahead of them in the polls. And not only did they pick up all of Hope's votes, but they also picked up some of Bowdoin's. And I think the voters looked at the thing and said, all right, Bowdoin right now, their best win is an 8 or 9 point win over a pretty good but unranked and not on the ballot for most people Mass Dartmouth team.
Mm-hmm.
And Thomas More has got 20-plus point victories over Chicago and Hope, who's in just about everybody's top 10.
And by the way, also Baldwin Wallace. And
right, depending on what you think,
right.
Whitewater and a bunch of other teams. And so, if it's the first weekend of the season, you don't flip your vote, but you get to a point where you will. Now, again, if Bowdoin comes out and beats Amherst by 20 points and Tufts by 20 points, stomps all over, they could flip those. They could flip those votes back. Sure. But I think what's more likely to happen here is each of those teams will take a loss somewhere along the way, and Thomas More will sort of take over the number one spot and then sit on it until the NCAA tournament.
Without continuing the D3ThomasMore.com theme, but one more before we let you go. I found your comments about the team fascinating because we do know about Madison Temple. I mean, she is darn good. She leads the in almost every single category for that team, and I literally mean almost every single category, including shooting percentages. She is that good. She is that to herself about it too. She is not very braggadocious whatsoever.
No.
But it's something you commented to us behind the scenes that caught me, I think, more surprising. It's not just her show. Because I made a comment. I said, listen, she may be the most impactful player for Thomas More, including Sydney Moss, in a single season because of the way she's playing. But you made a comment to that really really put things in perspective for me.
Yeah, I think this team around Madison Temple is better than the team that was around Sydney Moss or the teams, and that team had an All-American point guard on it in Abby Owings. But when I look at Thomas More now, they have two good, at least two. I mean, they may have more, but the ones that when I've watched their starters play, Shelby Rupp and Emily Schultz are both talented, athletic, mobile. I'll call them big men, forwards who Emily plays center more and Shelby's more of a forward, but they can play around the rim. They can score around the rim. They can kind of score on their own. Emily a little more than Shelby can. They're defensively daunting. They're tall. Hope spent most of its game against Thomas More flinging up threes from 25 feet out. And I think that's because even though Hope has some good forwards, just the physical build of those forwards isn't the same. And then what really makes Thomas More even more dangerous is you've got Kayla Sena and Brianna McNutt on the outside who are shooting 50 and 40% respectively and take a lot of threes. So they're shooting a high percentage from behind the arc. And so what that means is you have Temple, who's the point guard, and you really can't sag off of the other players and help against her, which is a lot of what Amherst did. Amherst last year when they beat Thomas More, they had the length and the size at the point guard position where they were pretty much able to just take Abby Owings out of the game and say, okay, Madison, go beat us, and it's going to be 1-on-3 or 1-on-2.5 every game. And now, if you help off of any of those other players, you're going to leave somebody wide open for a shot they're probably going to make. And so, that makes Thomas More a lot harder to beat, I think, this year than last year. And last year they obviously didn't lose many games.
Man, that's just impressive. And the sicker part is, could they imagine they could win the national championship in their final season in Division III, which is just insane. Anything else jump out at you about the first 6 weeks?
I think we've had an unusual number of teams from the South region that have been ranked, and I think appropriately so. But 3 from the American Southwest Conference, 1 from the Old Dominion Athletic Conference. It's kind of rotated between Emory and Henry and Randolph-Macon. Austin has been in the top 25. So I that's unusual. I think I've made an effort to watch more of those games this year because those conferences, particularly the ASC, the Texas Conference, it's so insular because they can't get to other schools, which isn't their fault, and then play so many conference games of their own. That when you look at, Mary Hardin Baylor beats Texas Tyler, who beats Texas Dallas, who beats Hardin Simmons, who beats Mary Hardin Baylor, you look at it and you go, all right, I don't really know what to make of any of those teams. Maybe they're all good, maybe they're all mediocre, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But I've made more of an effort to actually just watch them play. And for the most part, they all look like, at least Mary Hardin Baylor and East Texas Baptist. And I even, liked what I saw of a little bit of Texas Tyler when I watched them play. They all have good athletes. They all have good height at the point guard or at the guard positions. They can all, most of them can shoot the threes to some extent, and they all have some sort of plan of attack for getting forwards open down low. They're not all very good defensively, I would say. Some of them seem to play, at least maybe it's just because they're playing each other or individual matchups, but some of them play a very kind of lax 2-3 zone defense, which while leaving open shots for people kind of all over the place. But offensively and athletically, they're very talented. And so I think that's, if someone's been watching the poll for a while and starts to see these concentration of Texas teams, I think those teams for the most part are appropriately ranked.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Obviously, Austin on the show today, but it's fascinating to see how that has developed. And Trinity, Texas, by the way, we haven't even mentioned them, and they're not as good, but we're also talking at a pretty high level here. They're still pretty darn competitive and going to be in this conversation on top of all the ones you already mentioned.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, fascinating down there in the South, and then add in the South region's going to be crazy because you add in on top of that the ODAC, as you mentioned, and South region's going to be fun to watch this year.
Yeah, I think we'll. I look forward to some of these tournament results. Look forward to seeing how Mary Hardin Baylor and Thomas More play, or Wartburg played Randolph-Macon yesterday. Seeing some of these crossover matchups will help us out a little bit in terms of assessing the teams outside of their own region.
Absolutely.
So that was Gordon Mann's take of the first 6 weeks of the season. So what programs is he buying or selling? We'll talk to him about that when we come back. You're listening to Hoopsville, presented by D3 Hoops. Wirecast just froze on me again. I'm telling you, folks, we can't win. We absolutely cannot win with this software. We are doing things so painfully slow to keep this from happening, and it is not loving us in any iota whatsoever. So when we get back the machine, we will get back to Gordon's second half. I apologize for all the breakup. I wish I could do more. I can't. It doesn't like us. So we'll take a break. When we get the system back up and running, I promise you Gordon Mann's second half of his